Welcome back to the Blackletter podcast. We set out to create an entertaining and exciting podcast about law and business. Blackletter, the name, comes from the Gothic typeset. Over time, Blackletter became the only font that English law books were printed in. It made it harder for kind of the common person to understand what the English law books said. Blackletter came to represent something that was law, that was set in stone, that was sort of old and a well-settled fundamental principle of law. We're here to demystify black-letter law. We're here to demystify things that happen in business and law and where those two meet. And I hope you have fun listening. I think it's fair to say that even still in the United States, law tends to have more men than women practicing. And I think the firm that you work at is sort of a reflection of that. There are certainly female partners, but it's a male-dominated profession. And from what I understand, you're the boss of the company. So how does that work? And you're not a lawyer and you're not a man and you're running a firm full of, not completely full of, but a lot of lawyers and men with strong personalities. And I dare say, maybe David can back me up on this, lawyers have fairly big egos and fairly strong convictions about how they want to run things. How do you deal with that?
I think it's 100% accurate, but I think it's dealing with the same way of any, even back in aviation world, you had the same personalities. You have people that know what they're doing and they're very smart and they say, hey, it should be done this way. And I come in and say, hey, well, let's evaluate this and see what we can do better. I think part of the, when I started at DBL, a lot of it is to, one, understand what they are doing very well. And then, gain their trust and understanding and actually kind of have that knowledge base. Don't say, we're just going to do this, get their buy-in, which we do. And I think it's been successful. You have one small victory at a time and they start trusting you. And after you get trust, they start saying, oh, she really knows what she's doing and is more willing to kind of adopt it more quickly.
Well, so tell me about when you joined the firm. The firm was filing more trademarks than any other law firm in the United States. Yes. And had a sort of jumbled structure for the process of filing trademarks. I think it filed 1,400 trademarks in the U.S., or registered 1,400, filed 3,500 last year. How did you detangle that web? And did you have to learn about trademarks?
Yes. Sometimes I joke when, I came into the law firm initially, I knew what's the difference between a trademark and a copyright? I had no idea. So it was part of the process of learning. I went into that.
But now you know.
I know a lot more than I know a lot. Sometimes I hear people talking. I'm like, oh, that's not a copyright. That's a trademark. So it's kind of, now my news feed is filled with trademark stuff, which is kind of scary. It used to be aviation stuff. Now it's trademark or, business law, employment law. So, it's interesting. But I think you have to get involved to be able to solve the problems. And I think managers or anybody at any level, if you don't know how to do it yourself and understand what's going on, you can't solve the problem.
You guys have a goal at EBW, and assuming this healthcare stuff's part of that, to create $100 billion in social and economic impact in, I guess you've got 9 years left to do that, to get to $100 billion. Is that right? According to
yes.
So what are your plans to do? How are you going to get to $100 billion? That seems like a lot. And that's social and economic impact. So part of that, the lawyer in me, I want to know what we mean by social and economic impact. So what is that? Is that a footprint that you create by launching people out into the world? And then how do you get $100 billion of impact?
It's a great question. And actually, I, as I say to our executives and folks we work with, I like to try to keep things really simple and then hire super smart people around me, and get out of their way, make sure we're clearing paths. Regarding the $100 billion impact, the nice thing about it is we already have precedent set. We've done it. So we know how to do it. We know how to execute on it. And the way that you do it is basically 3 simple steps. First of all, our goal from a financial perspective is basically leveraging our platform to create, commerce of $1 billion between enterprise and these entrepreneurs. So I set up the first sort of innovators debt fund at Dell. And what we learned at Dell was essentially, if I loan Tom $1, right, you're going to take that dollar into your business and you're going to basically purchase the supplies that you need, hence back to why we were setting up the business distribution,
Right.
10x whatever I loan you. So we've got $1 billion. You're going to go out and purchase 10 billion or $10 worth of stuff. And then with that $10 worth of infrastructure in your business, you have the opportunity to create another 10x that impact in the marketplace.
Gotcha.
So when we look at it from billion, it's, billion out into the marketplace, leverage that to purchase with companies like Dell, AT&T, Visa, whatever it is, 10x, and then another 10x again in terms of what those companies actually will do in the space. It's a model, it's a recipe, if you will, that we've successfully set up, and we're simply just allocating, not allocating, but replicating it again.
So Ingrid, is this partial debt funding for women empowered businesses, and is it SBA backed, or is it commercially backed, or is it something like charitably backed, foundationally backed? Like, how do you guys back the debt? And then how do you manage when you accelerate a company? I assume that you guys have a percentage of the company, kind of like a venture capital group might, or something like that. Or do you just give them straight debt? Or does the model vary? I asked you like 20 questions, but yeah.
So it's a great question. And again, to simplify it, like the PE guys say, what is helpful as we work in the financial markets is EBW. If you look at it under one lens, people might be like, okay, wow, you do all these things, distribution, data, development. How do you actually do all that stuff? If you look through it through an investment or private equity lens, we're simply set up very similar to a private equity fund in the way that we operate. So where that money varies is I'm actually, while I love debt funds, I love, equity financing, I invest, we invest, all of that. I'm a huge fan of teaching women, like rather than even necessarily tapping into debt financing or going after equity financing, like go after large scale contracts. And there is a humongous dearth in the marketplace of knowledge of how to actually, how do you do a contract with a Dell when you're a smaller company? And so we teach something called the deal maker mindset. That's part of that accelerator that actually teaches you, this is how you land large scale deal. And we're huge fans of essentially, advocating for one of the growth metrics doesn't even have to necessarily be that financing. You can do it through revenue to the business. And, we teach women about margins and how to maximize your margins and reallocate that money to scale your business.
So if you're talking to a business right now, say you're talking to Council for Businesses or a mid-sized business, what piece of advice could you give them from your business when they're looking at market channels or trying to figure out how to be discreet or be better or go to market digitally, which is what you do? What, like 1, 2, or 3 things would you say, these are the things you must know, you must remember?
If you really want to get to the heart of it, you have to be honest. And that is so much easier said than done. You have to be honest with yourself. If you really want to make an impact and innovate, you have to be honest with what is your brand. Are you really appealing to the right people? And there's really great, again, my background's in, analyzing behavior. There's a lot of analytics that you can pull digitally now.
Let me ask you
to make
this
sure you're hitting the right audience.
Yeah. So Sabrina, if you look at your company and you're trying to be honest about your brand and you say, well, if we're honest, we're a law firm that uses carbon paper to do litigation and we, are struggling. So that's not a message you want to get out. What's your advice to a company that looks at itself and says, okay, well, if we're being honest, this is what we want to say, but this isn't who we are? How do you reconcile those things?
Right. By the way, that latter group that you just described is not the norm. Those are the true digital transformers. When you really understand that you have a problem, that's when the fun begins. That's when the good times roll, So to get there is actually a lot harder than it sounds. But if you're there, you're 50% of the way there. So to answer your question, though, how do you really make sure that you're making those appropriate steps? One of the best things that we have available to us now, both as attorneys, business owners, innovators, is there's a ton of data. And data can tell you just about everything that you want to know. If you want to know exactly who to target, if you want to understand how your competitors are really making a digital imprint or not, you can learn from other people's mistakes. So I guess, first get honest, second, get close to the data. Forbes just published something on mine around this, which There's so much data. I think if you know exactly what to look for and you understand it, you can influence just about anything.
So first piece of advice is be honest with yourself and your company. Get close to the data about who you're trying to target and what you're targeting in terms of,
right,
I guess, demographic. And then is there a third piece of like, this is the golden, answer? I don't know.
This is where Continuum came in this sort of step 1, 2, and 3.
Okay.
Is, 1 is really hard, like we talked about. Number 2 is actually not as difficult when you know what you're looking for. And number 3 is where it gets difficult again, so it's kind of like a fun sandwich, if you will. So the third part is,
I like fun sandwiches.
The third part is, who doesn't? The third part is really about making it happen. Execution. And that's where you've got to get a solid team. Be honest with yourself again. If you don't have a solid team, outsource. Don't be afraid to outsource because you've got to execute. What's the saying? Best laid plan. I mean, you have to make sure that your plan is really executed against, especially when it's backed on data. There's a lot of things that you can influence. So make sure that you are really looking holistically. You really built out that solid plan that addresses, your channel, your internal teams across the board, and then your marketing teams, and then execute like you've never executed before. And I promise you it works every time.
We talked briefly about the Great Resignation and the article you've recently written about that. I laid out what I thought the Great Resignation was. What I've read is that just masses of people are resigning. What's the answer to that? I mean, I guess retention's part of it, but how do you recruit out of that? Or how do you flip that on its head?
Well, retention is the third part, but the first thing that you need to do is face it, right? Now, what we're seeing right now in some of the larger corporations in particular is, well, if we walk into a recession, there's going to be more people available. I'm going to be able to hire. So there's those of us that have started talking about this. Remember the war for talent in 2000, 2001, when the bubble popped in IT? It's not getting any better. And now it has expanded, right? So now, because of the pandemic in particular, and if you get a chance to see the article, and I'll quote Dr. Hires, once you've come through a trauma, you reevaluate your life. And if you're able to make less money or look at an alternative way to make income, which there's so many of those avenues out there, you're not going to return to a regular workforce. Now, when you look globally, the U.S. in particular, right, we work longer and harder than most of the other developed nations, right? Our 9 to 5 has now been totally exposed and unmasked. All of this said, I can tell you this, there's a job for every person and a person for every job. Even if there's a shortage in your talent, there's ways that you can work in the talent base that you're looking for. There's ways that you can work around that, but it starts by putting good business acumen around your talent acquisition. And it doesn't matter if you're that gas station owner that we were talking about the other day, or if we're talking about, Fortune 10, the Fortune 10, and having worked with all of them, I can tell you, everybody has their own issue. But once you apply these really good practices, and, the name of the article is Turn and Face the Strange. The reason that we call that is it's a strange work. It is strange. What's out there? It keeps changing. It's morphing. The workforce isn't necessarily certain about what they want to do either. Their core may be, I know I don't want to do that. But what am I going to do in the interim? But one of the biggest concerns I have that I was alluding to earlier is these organizations that are saying, well, we're going to hit a recession. These people are going to flood back to the workforce. I'm not saying. I mean, it would have to be catastrophic. So we have to learn and face this new world of work. And with that, we have to come back and really take a long, hard look at who we are as an employer. And that's the beginning.
One of the challenges we have and other people have is even just getting resumes in the door. And, putting up a job ad on LinkedIn or Law Crossing for lawyers or, I don't know, all the different recruiting websites doesn't seem to be effective. What are effective ways to just get your company so people can see that you're hiring? Or
let me make this really clear. People aren't looking for jobs. So if they aren't looking, no, some people,
right?
A massive amount of people are not looking for jobs. So what worked pre-pandemic is not going to work now, which is really, if you look at the recruiting technologies out there, all on work, right? So there was this movement towards CRMs, candidate relationship management. But in order to hire now, you have to know who you are, and then you have to look for those individuals and bring them into the nest. you can absolutely do that through technology to a degree, right? But what you've got to do is get smart at the technology you're looking, rework, relook, and rethink about who you are, and then think about who fits you and advertise very pinpointed towards that market.
So tell me a little bit about how you approach infringers or how you approach protecting your intellectual property. I understand we file patents. Everybody files patents, and there's this shotgun approach: file as many as you can, and hopefully you'll capture stuff. And there's defensive and offensive patent filings. But what do you guys do when it comes to somebody taking your IP, or you notice, or has that happened?
We do take the offense, and yes, it's happened, and if you're in business, then it's going to happen. And you're going to get infringers of your trademarks and also your patents. And it's important that you defend them. And so we do. And usually the defense is kind of progressive. You'll send out the cease and desist letter, which actually works sometimes. Just recently, we had a situation where we sent out a letter last week, and we got a response, which was quick from the
trademark
person.
Or patent?
It was trademark. And we got a response. So sometimes the basics actually work. And so we take that tact.
Sort of surprising.
That is surprising sometimes, but there are certain circumstances where the soft approach is not going to work. We don't, and with any decision that you make with respect to using official forums like litigation, there's got to be a business case for that. And the business case is the potential value that's being compromised for the business, and also the cost of the litigation, and not just outside counsel costs, but also the internal time and distraction costs for the organization. But another factor that we consider is, what needs to be understood by the market in terms of Solenis's position on defending its intellectual property. So in certain circumstances, we have had to file offensively.
Right.
And we've done that because of the landscape and what was going on in the marketplace.
So if I were to kind of dig a little bit into that was a lot to unpack, but I think that's really vital. As a general counsel of a big $3 billion chemical company, every single piece of litigation, you're not going to even launch a $50,000 litigation for no business case reason. It's got to have an external business value and an internal business value, I guess. Is that right? They have to...
Yeah, it
has to make financial sense.
Cost benefit, and the benefits can be dollars, but it also can be the statement to the market about your fortitude in protecting your intellectual property. And the costs are, obviously the legal costs, but also the internal costs, because you can't, conduct litigation without employees being involved. And if the employees are involved in litigation, then they're not doing what we ultimately have paid them to do, which is to make money and to generate value for customers. And so that benefit, that balance has got to be there before you affirmatively take on litigation.
Tell me about how you started Reston Limousine and grew it from 5 to 250 and how long that took. I mean, to me, I read your story, of course, and I think we've met before, but I don't know what was the grit and what was that thing that made it successful? Because so many people will say, hey, I want to build a business, or I want to get I'm going to start with one car or one moving van and start a company. And it doesn't work all the time. Obviously, Not everybody grows, and you grew a lot. So what is that secret sauce?
I like to say I was at the right place at the right time, because I was at the Reston Town Center in the early 90s. And not only did I benefit from all the .coms that were growing like crazy in those days, I benefited also from having a contract with the Hyatt Regency Reston, who fed me a lot of work. And then one day, this guy just knocked on the door to the office and said, "Do you guys want to bid on a government contract?" And I said, "Well, what's that?" He said, "Oh, well, my wife works across the street at U.S. Geological Survey in Reston, and they run 2 vans back and forth all day long into D.C." And I said, "Sure." So I took the proposal and I looked at it, and I just thought it was overwhelming, and I didn't know how I was going to, figure it out. But I figured it out, and I won that contract. And so then I thought, well, if there's a contract for USGS, there have to be other government contracts. And so I started researching them and figured out that every single government agency has an inner city bus route connecting their buildings. And so their employees can get to meetings and other offices. They can get to the office from the metro. And I just started bidding on these. And for the next 5 years, I won every single contract I bid on in Washington, in the right place at the right time. And then, being able to expand on that opportunity. So that between that and the .coms, and for example, Ted Leonsis was our client, and we drove him to work every day for 4 years. And then he got his own car and driver. That's an example of the type of business that was around in the 90s. And so we went from 0 to 5 million in revenue without any problems. And then we lost our small business, status.
Right.
So then we had to diversify into universities and hospitals. And it was at that time that we decided my husband would stay home with the 5 kids and that I would run the business. The second 10 years of our business, I grew it to 17 million and asked for divorce, bought him out. And then the third decade, I grew it to $30 million.
So Kristina, fantastic. So the government contracts piece, right place, right time, but also, you took the initiative. And I think a lot of businesses don't always take the initiative. You won the government contract, but to me, it sounds like you're like, well, this seems like a good opportunity. Let me take that and open that book wider.
Yes.
And I'm sure we're government contractors too. And we're government contractors because we've been representing them for 20 years. And about 8 years ago, we're like, we should start bidding on some of these. So we're counsel to NIH and DHS, and we do some legal stuff. But it was the same thing. It was opening that book. And I think a lot of people don't do that. They just kind of look and say, well, I got this opportunity. Here's the money now. So I think that's really key to your story. So is there anything I know you do a lot of charitable works. You sit on some boards. Is that an important part of your business and an important part of your network? Or how does that play into what you do?
So absolutely. The first 10 years, as I said, we were very, very busy, growing quickly. But at the end of those 10 years, 9/11 happened and it got very slow and we plateaued. We didn't grow for 5 years. And it was then that I started networking because the phones literally were not ringing.
Right.
And I thought, let me get out there and drum up some business. So I joined a couple of chambers. I joined the Committee for Dulles and volunteered my time to help those organizations. And that meant pretty much either volunteering on the membership committee or volunteering on the annual gala and helping them raise money through silent auctions. And soon I was recognized as sort of a worker bee, kind of a doer in the group. And I was offered board seats. And one board seat sort of led to another. And so today I'm on 10 boards of directors. And It's really that board level networking that has brought me the opportunities that have allowed my business to grow and allowed me to grow personally as well. And during that time, I also joined a mastermind, a business book club, and I've joined an organization called Vistage.
Okay.
Vistage is a CEO membership organization where you take a day off from work every month and you go to an offsite retreat with 18 CEOs. And you not only have a great speaker in the morning, but you solve each other's business problems in the afternoon. So I did a ton of learning in Vistage and would say, without a doubt, it was the single best decision I ever made.
Wow.
In my career was joining that group because it was there that I learned how to scale my business. It was there that I learned how to do proper, performance evaluations and 24-month rolling forecasts. And I could just go on and on and on. It was there that I really was educated because I'm a political science major running a business. And at some point I needed some serious technical education and help. And that's where I got it.
I feel you. I was an English theater major, and now I'm running a law firm. And I felt those days. I went back to school and got an MBA, but I love the Vistage thing. I've been approached by them before, and I've always been kind of like, well, I don't know. It seems like a time commitment and money, and I just didn't know if there was value in it. But it's great to hear that from you. And I think I'll circle back and look at it again, maybe, because it does sound like you got real value out of it.
Cherylyn, just to ask you, what if a company doesn't want to apply for forgiveness? And I guess my question is, why would you not want to apply? That'd be my first question. But my second question then is, if there is a reason you don't want to, what's the circumstance? What's the stand?
That's a very good question, Tom, because actually here at DBL, we get that question often. And when a client comes to me and says, well, I don't want to apply for forgiveness, the first thing I say to them, well, why wouldn't you want to apply for forgiveness?
That's my question.
Because if you are in fact adhering to the legislative intent of the bill, then you would want to apply for forgiveness because then we know that you are using the money as it is intended for payroll expenses. How I guide clients is I say to them, well, let's continue on the path of keeping proper records so that you can, in fact, apply for forgiveness. And if the guidance changes, and we know that it might, right, shift a little bit, if the guidance changes, either way, whether you apply for forgiveness or not, you have the proper records and paper in place. But I think it's very important to continue to remind clients and small businesses that you really need to use that money for as it is intended.
Okay.
And that is to make sure that you are using it on payroll expenses, Tom.
So that ties in then, Cherylyn, to the question of what about the certifications the form requires? So it requires, and I've had questions from clients about this, that they have to certify certain things and are not sure whether or not they can certify some of the things. And some of them have been really sort of ambiguous. Even when I've looked at them, I've had to go to you for help. So tell us a little bit about that.
The latest guidance that came out on Friday, Tom, really gave a lot of small business owners a sigh of relief, because they basically stated that if you're under $2 million, right, if your loan was under $2 million, essentially we're going to give you a pass. However, I caution businesses, let's not get too comfortable. That doesn't mean you won't be audited. It doesn't mean you still don't have to adhere to the rules. So you still need to show that you, in fact, needed that loan. And I encourage everyone to keep as great of records as you possibly can. For example, if, you were expecting a $1.4 million sales contract and you didn't get that, let's see in writing or an email that showed you were relying on that $1.4 million contract and you didn't get it, because that also went into reasons why you would have applied for a PPP loan, because you knew that you weren't getting as much money in that you thought you were going to get. So again, all of these details and documentations that business owners can show why they felt they needed that loan and to show why they felt that they were in a bit of a financial crisis.
Gotcha. Understand. We have government contracts clients now that are seeing this current administration pull back on military spending. And a lot of our clients they're anticipating, and they're hearing from their contracting officers that there's going to be reductions or terminations or early terminations or non-renewals of options. And I mean, it's kind of a mess. So you were just, I don't know if it doesn't sound like you planned it that way, but you were in a very safe kind of administration agnostic deal. Like practice, right?
I did plan it that way. Fed Consulting, the old consulting company. I didn't see a couple things coming in that 2001 timeframe. I didn't see the mergers and acquisitions killing my business. I also didn't see the competition. I was younger, wasn't quite as street smart, hadn't been bitten hard,
Sure.
And made a lot of mistakes. The business almost went under in 2002. We closed our offices. I moved back home, had to reinvest.
Wow.
It was a tough time. So I decided that was never going to happen again. So in that time frame, when I was planning for this, for 2002 and 2004, planning for this launch and the federal government work directly, I did some market analysis and I looked at the immigration space. What's nice about immigration is that it's fee for service. So if an applicant is applying for citizenship, for example, they're going to pay a fee. Let's say $100. Of that $100 that they apply, 10, 20% of it goes for the processing of their application, which we get. So we charge, I'm making numbers up. I have no idea. We charge $8, to process an application. And that basically comes straight from that working capital fund that is funded by the applicant. So
you weren't tied to appropriations as much.
Illegal immigration is the one that has to be appropriated by Congress.
Yeah.
All legal immigration is not. It's all done fee for service. All done.
That's really, really smart. That's something that a lot of people, they see the dollar signs in military contracts, but what you did was really, really a lot of foresight there. So
I saw what happened in '96, in January of '96, when they didn't appropriate the budget. Way back when, I think it was Clinton in office, and the were in the House, and they refused to appropriate money, and the government shut down, nearly killed companies because of the appropriations. And I didn't want to be tied to any political party that was in Congress or in the White House. So I really that fee for service kind of work. Now, obviously, we did have some work that wasn't fee for service, but most of it was. And we went after contracted the U.S. Coast Guard, processing mariner credentials, Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. One of my first government contracts I won way back in like 1998, before I was even thinking about this change. And 20 years, we processed their certifications, Customs Border Patrol for those guys, all their training support. But we did all their graduation certificates, all their training programs. We did all the work behind that. It's all adjudication support in the background. It's not actually on the front lines, except when you're doing, ceremonies for immigration, citizenship kind of things. But for the most part, we're those back office people that you didn't see, with their heads to the grindstones, typing in and processing all of that adjudication work, background investigative work, making sure that people are vetted properly before they become citizens or before they get a work visa, before they even come across the border. So that's the work that we did. Yeah. And again, all fee for service. So pretty exciting. I mean,
so brilliant.
Well, it wasn't actually brilliant, but it was just, I thought about it.
Much congratulations to you. That's all for today's episode of Blackletter. Thanks again for listening. Join us next time when we talk about more Blackletter issues in creative ways. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode, and check out our website at blackletterstudios.com.